English and philosophy. I've been here for, my kids tease me because I can't remember how many years. I don't know, 10, 15, somewhere in between 10 and 15 years. And as the philosophy guy here, I teach most of the philosophy courses. As you might imagine, I think a lot about what the role of the arts and humanities is in college education. And I lecture about it. So what I wanted to do today is share with you the way that I frame it with my students. This is a lecture, it's loosely based on lectures that I give in my Intro to Philosophy class, in my film classes, sometimes in my World Lit classes, because they're heavily populated with non-humanities majors, non-English majors, and also I do it because I feel like since the Industrial Revolution, we've been slowly weaning ourselves off the idea of what the role of the arts and humanities is, not just in education, but in human life. And I want to make an argument in my talk today that we have turned the world upside down. Now, not everything I'm going to say is completely original to me. So I'm going to play you a short video, and I'm going to warn you that there's adult language, but I think adult language in the service of humor is no vice.
Pharmacy, our pharmacists are vaccine experts. Don't know what you need, or if you're covered, we can help. Most insurance...
You could not, I can explain it. As for me, if you want to know what I think, I'll show you something. Come with me. I was saying that... hello? Come on. Hello? Hello? This way. Come on, don't be shy. Mind the stairs, all right? I think this will help explain. Come on up. Over here. Come on. This way. You see that? That's where I was born. You know, one day my mother, she put me on her knee and she said to me, Gaston, my son, the world is a beautiful place. You must go into it and love everyone. Try to make everyone happy and bring peace and contentment everywhere you go. And so I became a waiter. Well, it's not much of a philosophy, I know. Well, fuck you. I can live my own life in my own way if I want to. Fuck off. Don't come following me.
So that's a scene from Monty Python's, really the last film they made together as a troupe called The Meaning of Life. And it's just filled with vignettes where they address what is the meaning of life. And I thought that would be a good place to start, since I teach the philosophy courses here, because people tend to think of philosophy as not necessarily, right? But about the meaning of life. What is it? Shortly after I got here and I started teaching philosophy, one of our psychology professors, I had to meet with him for something else, and he said, so, you know, what is the goal of life? And I said to be happy. And if you go back to the ancient Greeks, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle all answer the question the same way. What is the meaning of life? It's to lead the good life, right? So the next questions become, what is it that we need to know in order to do that? Now, at the end of my presentation, I decided I wasn't going to start it this way. I wanted to end it this way. I'm going to walk you through a brief version of a thought experiment that I do with my philosophy classes, my film classes sometimes, even my lit classes. And this is, I just wanted to share with you this crazy, you've got it in your hand so that you can read some of the details of it. This is sort of a map of my brain. And it's an effort to diagram sort of the evolution of human beings in their attempts to create societies that will allow for the leading of the good life. Now, the early philosophers did not agree on what that necessarily entailed. Famously, Plato offers us his allegory of the cave. Uh-oh, where'd they go? I was going to show you a short video, but I won't. And in the allegory of the cave, he says that human life is like being trapped in a cave, chained to a wall, where you can only look forward. It's much like this room, where a light from behind you is emanating onto the wall, and all you see are blurred images and shadows and hear muffled sounds. And then he says, imagine if somebody was able to escape their chains and run up the steps to the source of the light. And they discovered that we exist inside a cave. And that what he had taken, of course, when he exited the cave, of course, what is going to be the very first experience he has in the dazzling light? Do you think? It's going to be painful, right? Your eyes are not adjusted. He's going to have to squint but as his eyes adjust, he begins to realize that what he's been watching in front of him is not reality. This is reality. It's the reflection of this up here. So he excitedly runs back down the stairs and helps the others get out of their chains and says, no, 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 come with me, I made this great discovery. And they all run up the stairs, and probably about 99% of them turn around and run right back down and get in the chains because it's too painful. And so this sort of typifies Plato's understanding. And then in the Republic, he offers his prescription for what civilization looks like when it's devoted to the good life. And unlike Aristotle, he he literally says that the good life is reserved only for the precious few. Only the few are going to be able to sustain it. Now, Aristotle, for his part, he speaks in terms of eudaimonia. And it's translated happiness or contentedness. And according to him, this is actually possible for all of us. It doesn't require a certain necessary design or civilizational model to achieve. But it does require us to know certain things to get to it. And so if you look at the Aristotle handout I gave you, Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great, and in this great book that I use in my Intro to Philosophy course called Action Philosophers, they have a chapter wherein we get a comic rehearsal of Aristotle teaching Alexander the Great about human knowledge. And the story he tells is this, that human beings delight in the senses, and they delight not just because the senses tell them information about the outside world, but they delight in the senses for their own sake. And the king of the senses in this delight is seeing, sight. Because sight is what tells us the differences between things, okay? Better than the other senses do. And then he walks him through. With sight, we make distinctions. And if we are an animal that is endowed with memory, then we are capable of experience, which is kind of the reverse of the way we normally think about the relationship between memory and experience. Aristotle says experience itself is not possible unless you can string together the memories of similar experiences. Do you see what I mean? Those memories, And that's what experience is. So intelligence is measured by a capacity for memory. The more memory an animal has, the better able they are to think and have experiences, right? But then he starts to talk about levels of knowledge that we have. And this is the page I gave you, and I'm not going to read it to you, but he walks through them. He says the most fundamental kind of knowledge we have is utilitarian. For instance, he says, art arises from when many notions gained by experience, one universal judgment of a class can be made. So if you discover, as primates in Africa have discovered, that eating charcoal will settle an acid stomach, and then somebody else complains about that acid stomach, and you apply that knowledge, then Aristotle says this is raising the level of knowledge to an art, because you're applying a particular knowledge to a class of things, all right? And then he walks Alexander through. For men of experience may know that a thing is so, but not why. Hence, we think that master workers in each craft are wiser than manual workers, for they know the causes of the things that are done. Furthermore, artists, because they know the whys of a thing, unlike men of mere experience, may teach others how to do it. So the man of experience is smarter than those that merely possess sense perception, the artist smarter than the man of experience, the master worker than the mechanic. But if I am to be king, I need to be smarter than all of them combined. Turn it over on the back. Indeed, a good ruler requires wisdom, which deals with the first causes and principles of things, and that's metaphysics. So you'd think that from the philosophical point of view, I would say that ultimately Aristotle and Plato agree that the highest knowledge that we can possess is philosophical. And this is not the conclusion ultimately, I would say, that Aristotle draws. It may be the one that Plato does, but there's kind of a divide at the very beginning, okay? So I shared with you an image from this is from the Vatican. This is Raphael's school at Athens. And you can see the divide in Western philosophy right at the beginning. That's Plato and Aristotle standing side by side with each other. And you notice Plato is gesturing upward toward the realm of the forms and the ideals. And Aristotle is disputing him, and sort of his arm is gesturing downward. Because Aristotle does not reject the idea that the material universe has nothing to teach us about the truth, okay? And as the school at Athens, of course, is an illustration of anachronistically putting together all the great thinkers from the ancient world. And it's in the Vatican right next to the Sistine Chapel. The story about Raphael, who was a 20-year-old, prodigy painter, at the same time that Michelangelo is doing the Sistine Chapel, is that Raphael would peek in to see what the master was doing, right? And then he paid his homage to Michelangelo right here. And he drew a portrait of one of the philosophers as Michelangelo, and he painted it in Michelangelo's style. Michelangelo's physical style for his figures in his painting is Roman. Thick-trunked, thick-legged, and all the other figures in here are Raphael's, which he favored the Greek athletic style rather than the Roman. So I think that's kind of funny. But I also included an image from Chaucer's The House of Fame. I wish I could have found a better one. But what I wanted to illustrate with these two images is that as education in the West develops, it's based on the academic, the Plato school, the academy, named after his favorite mentor, Academos. Later, Aristotle would basically be fired from that school, and he'd start his own. And then the academy finally closed down, and Aristotle's thrived during his lifetime. Those become the model for the very universities that we teach in today, right? And they develop even more into the modern version during the Middle Ages. That's why I included Chaucer here. Where in the Middle Ages, the disciplines began to be seen as interrelated to each other. And with the invention of theology, largely single-handedly by Aquinas, theology became the queen of the sciences, and philosophy was the handmaiden to theology, right? Until we get to modern times. So if you look at this map, you'll see what I've tried to show are the paradigmatic shifts that we've gone through. You know, prior to the classical world, we are oral, we are tribal, and it takes thousands and thousands of years for us to improve. You know, hunter-gatherers, we command fire, that makes things a little bit better. Then we domesticate the animal and the seed all over the world at around the same time, weirdly, and probably at about the same time. I don't know which one came first. I would imagine it was the seed. And that would simply be a matter of our being thinking beings noticing that every spring the herd animals came back to the same areas where the plants that they thrived on always grew more richly where they pooped. And so some ingenious person went up and said, "What's this magical stuff?" And they found seeds. And then they reasoned, wait a minute, instead of chasing the animals around, why don't I coax them by planting what they eat near me? And of course we end up producing food more efficiently, right? And so hunter-gatherers as a style of life die out all over the world, not because they're obliterated by farmers, and this is the argument I make, but because the women in the hunter-gatherer societies take a look from the hill into the valley at a farm and smack their husbands on the arm and say, "You need to learn how to do that." Right? Because you have to understand, hunter-gatherer societies can only be so big. Women are not going to have more than one child until the child that they are breastfeeding is old enough to be able to keep up. Then they will get pregnant again. Do you see what I mean? Farming women don't have to move, so guess what they can do much more quickly? Produce more children, right? And so they're able to produce more food than they need. And then trade ends up becoming a substitute for war. And we transition away from the shield of Achilles, and the Iliad really is a lament to a dying tribal society and a warrior culture as it transitions to a new mode of civilization, which Homer writes about in the Odyssey. The warrior has to submit to a new form of social and civil and political organization, right? This is all set up for the end with my So I'm going to jump up to Shakespeare, all right? When I was an undergraduate, I was lucky enough to go to a school that had a campus in Rome. And people find this very, very hard to believe, but as soon as I transferred from the University of Missouri to the University of Dallas, on the very first day of class, in my philosophy class, I had taken intro at MU. Now I was in philosophy of man. That's what it's called at UD, the second philosophy you take. Everybody's got to take these 12 hours of philosophy, no matter what their majors are at that school. Classical liberal arts, core curriculum. And so pre-med majors, pre-law, history majors, art majors, English majors, we are all in all of those core classes together. And on the very first day of class at this new campus, the professor said, and these were sophomores, the professor said, and you'll remember that Plato kicks the artist out of the Ideal Republic in Book 10 because he is a purveyor of lies and copies of copies of copies of reality. And I looked around the room, and every single person in the room knew what he was talking about, and I had no idea. So I shut up. I took my refund money, I bought the complete works of Aristotle and the complete works of Plato, and I read them, because I was behind, right? And for the rest of my undergraduate career at UD, I simply remained silent. And it was vanity that I did that, because I didn't, what's the old saying? Remain silent and be thought a fool, or open your mouth and remove all doubt. So I never spoke in class. I didn't start speaking in class until you're required to as a graduate student, right? You gotta run it. But when I was in Rome, we were reading King Lear, and it was moving toward the end of the semester in that class. Dr. Foudrous was our lit professor, and we were having a class discussion about King Lear, and the students in the class, all of whom were sophomores, I was a senior at the time, so I'm a little bit more mature. I had kept saving out my Rome classes because I was paying for school myself, and I always kept feeling like, I can't afford to go, but I'm gonna make it, so I finally made it. in the fall semester of my first senior year, because I graduated late. And Dr. Foudrous is just shocked at how, ugly all the students are being about poor Cordelia. And if you haven't read King Lear, there's a scene in King Lear at the beginning, kicks off the plot, where King Lear asks his daughter, Goneril, how much do you love me? And she says, Father, I love you more than all of the money in the royal treasury. What do you think she's after? And then he turns to Regan and says, how much do you love me? She says, I love you more than all of the lands that you command in this kingdom. What do you think she's after? And he turns to the youngest, Cordelia, bit of a Cinderella story here, and says, how much do you love me? And she said, I love you according to my bond, no more and no less. And of course, King Lear is enraged by this and he banishes her from the kingdom. And then the rest is downhill for King Lear until he has an epiphany. It's a tragedy, so it's too late, right? And so Foudrous looked around the room and he said, my, you guys are being, because they're like, why didn't she just tell him what he wanted to hear? Right? Which is kind of an illegitimate question. That's not what she did, right? We have to deal with what she did. And he said, so is there anybody here that wants to defend Cordelia's answer? And I raised my hand. First time the whole semester in any of my classes. And he said, Mr. Borse, we haven't heard from you. And I said, well, according to Plato and Aristotle, the role of education is to teach each person the good, so that they are in the habit of the good by the time they are mature enough to make their own decisions, right? That's the task of education according to those two, and it makes some sense. And then if we jump forward to Dante and Aquinas in the Middle Ages, we notice in Dante, in the Inferno, there is a realm in hell that's devoted for those who love too little, which intuitively makes sense to us, right? But there's also a realm devoted to those who love too much, which might seem like a foreign concept, but it makes sense. And then Aquinas says that the task of being human is to love each thing with the kind and degree of love it deserves, no more and no less, which is really what Cordelia's answer was. So I said, really, he's enraged by the truth. She's the one that gives the most appropriate answer. I love you as a daughter ought to love a father, no more and no less, which is the right answer. I remember when we got out of class and then we ended up back in our dorm room, my roommate Paul walks in and he just throws his books on his bed and says, well, thanks a lot. And I was like, what? He goes, you don't say one word all semester and then you come out with that? And I'm like, sorry, right? But I've always tried to synthesize. So, so Shakespeare's view that seems to be expressed through Cordelia here does look back, right? It looks backward to a classical notion of what the role of education in civilization is and why it is important. And then if we turn around and look forward, right, to the age that we come through on my map here, and you'll notice I've given events like the transition from the old oral tribal culture to the medieval one is duly attended by the Christ event and the collapse of the Roman Empire, right? And we fall back into a tribalism called feudalism in Europe, right? But now that feudalism is thoroughly Catholic and Christian until the very late stages, right? And then what happens in the East, the old eastern half of the Roman Empire, which didn't fail like the western half did, is that it finally fails. And what happens? All of the classical learning that's been preserved in what used to be called Constantinople comes flooding back into Florence, Italy. And the Renaissance happens, right? In fact, it's not until Plato was known in Europe before the Renaissance, but Aristotle really wasn't. And we got Aristotle back because of two wonderful Arabic scholars, Avicenna and Averroes, who had been translating him from the Greek into Arabic, and then when they had their own collapse, when the Puritans won and started burning all the books and saying if it doesn't come out of the Quran, then you shouldn't have anything to do with it, and Aristotle was going into the flames. So it's because of them that their translations sort of got smuggled through Africa and into, or through the Middle East and then into Europe. And of course, I put Aquinas in this group because when the church was confronted with the Latin translations from the Arabic and the Greek of Aristotle, didn't know what to do with it. So Albert the Great, who was Thomas Aquinas' abbot, ordered him to read the philosopher and make a pronouncement about it. Can this be taught? And Aquinas read it, and he said, well, here's his logic. And I have a saying, I'm Catholic. Aquinas was Catholic. And I don't know if I coined this saying, I wish I did, but probably not. But we don't believe a thing is true because it's Catholic. We believe it's Catholic because it's true. And we get that from Aquinas. All truth then must come from where? It must come from God. So knowledge of the truth in some ways is knowledge of God. But if we couple that with Aristotle's ranking of these different levels of knowledge, right? If you go back to that sheet and say, all right, yeah, that makes sense, right? This basic sensory knowledge is less valuable to us than a practical knowledge. And practical knowledge is less valuable than practical knowledge plus. You notice each level of knowledge is adding, includes the one before it and adds, right? But the other thing that Aristotle said when he was writing in his Ethics and other books regarding the good life is that anything that we wish to possess, which is for the sake of another thing, is less valuable than the thing for which it gets us, right? So means are not as high in the order of the good than ends. A hammer is a good thing, but better still is the nail that the hammer drives through the wood to build the frame of the house. And better still than the frame of the house is the finished house. And better still than the finished house than the life that it affords to the family that lives in it securely, right? So at each level, we're moving toward. And so, you know, this is a lecture I give to my kids who are in college. I always ask them the same question. Why are you here? And answer invariably usually is because I want to get a good job. And I say, look, I've got some secrets I want to tell you. First of all, there isn't enough money. Second of all, there's no such thing as a good job. Jobs suck. They do. And I'll ask them, I'll say, you remember when you got your first paycheck? You're like just to see your name on the paycheck, like this is mine, I earned this. You were like floating, right? And then you could just flash forward about 6 weeks, you'd be like, Carl, can you freaking stand that guy? I'm just gonna quit this job, you know what I mean? That's a job. Now, are you gonna have plenty of jobs on your way? Of course you are. Of course you are, because you've gotta buy food, you've gotta pay bills, you gotta get to and from, you gotta do your life, right? But the goal is not the job. So I tell them my third thing. Don't mistake the thing for the thing. The unhappiest people in the world that I have ever seen are the ones that mistook the thing for the thing, right? They thought that fame was going to do it. They thought that a lot of money was going to do it. They thought, right? And then they actually achieve those things and they're miserable. Well, that's because they mistook the thing for the thing. So you guys can immediately recognize happy people. You always can immediately, because they're grounded and they haven't mistook the thing for the thing. They're not, you know. So I warn them that they need to make sure to remind themselves of that, right? But then I want to go back to the idea that the highest knowledge is not philosophical knowledge. And I remind my students, sometimes my students say, well, you're a philosopher. No, I'm not a philosopher. I should have a t-shirt that just says, Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, yeah, what they say. Now that doesn't mean that I believe that everything Aristotle said is correct. Apparently he thought that women had fewer teeth than men, and all he had to do was count them, but he never bothered to do it, right? He didn't know how many legs a fly has. You know, I mean, so yeah, he didn't get everything right? But on the whole, I track with his logic about things for some, I think, some reasons that are evident. There's evidence for the fact that he's right about these things. So I put another one of my jokes here. I'm not a philosopher because Aristotle and Aquinas were right. Who is to be, I didn't mean to put sin there, because it belongs to the next one. Sinatra, the famous philosopher, said doobie doobie doo. Maybe the most famous of them all. Fred Flintstone said yabba dabba doo. All right, now I made that progression for a reason as I come to the end. Come on. There we go. Some of this is loosely based on my reading of Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And interestingly enough, there's another UD plug in here. UD, when you're accepted to their college, they send you a packet the summer before you come, and it includes a book. And they ask every incoming freshman to read the book because that's the theme of the first week on campus, because classes start the second week. First week, we are going to acclimate you to this place. And I was just so excited when I got the letter. They didn't charge me any money for the book. They said, please read this in preparation because there will be a series of lectures on contemplating, this is our theme. And every year it's a different theme. And I hope they still do it. I haven't checked. But what Joseph Pieper said is he said, you know, since the Industrial Revolution, we've gotten the relationship between leisure and work backwards. And in modern times, since the Renaissance and the Age of Reason and the Industrial Revolution, we work, right? We live to work, and we have leisure to rest up to do more work. So we have things called vacations, and we have weekends, right? And he says this is to get it backwards. Human beings were not fit to live this way. And his argument, and I'm paraphrasing because I didn't reread the book for today, is simply that a lot of modern unhappiness can be attributed to capitalistic and materialistic greed, mistaking the thing for the thing, chasing the brass ring, right? And we've forgotten what the good life actually is. And so I found this. I thought you guys would like this. You guys remember the movie with, you know, the guy who has the plane crash and then he's stuck on the island, and, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so this is the thought experiment that I do with my students. I'm checking the time, make sure we're good. And I say, imagine that you wake up like him. You're normal, you're adult, you're a normally functioning human being, and you're on an island. You have the capacity for thought and language. You are absolutely alone, but you have no idea how you got there, okay? And you don't know anything. You're going to have to, so here maybe I'm being an empiricist, right? You're going to have to learn. You're going to have to learn everything, but you have the capacity to do that. Now, for the purposes of the thought experiment, let's give you a lifespan of, say, 1 billion years. You are going to die, but you got a long time, right, on your island. And I asked the students, okay, so what are your first concerns going to be? They're going to immediately be your own security, and they're probably going to cluster around thirst and hunger, right? And any sort of environmental discomfort that you feel because you don't have any clothes covering, you're on a sandy beach. And then slowly but surely, through your sense, your ability to sense, and your memory and your experience, you start to notice certain things. That is, you intuitively gravitate to that liquidy stuff that's coming up on the beach because you're thirsty, and you immediately discover what? It's salty and it makes you sick, right? But soon enough, you notice that there is a stream that's trickling down from the central island's mountain, right? And that looks clear and clean, so you try that and it sates your thirst, right? So you say, all right, that's the drinkable stuff, that's not the drinkable stuff, right? You also notice that when you spend long periods of time in that thing that you are going to come to call the sun, right? That travels across the sky and then goes, but it always comes back, right? That your skin reddens and it's uncomfortable. But then you notice that when you walk over to the stream where you can drink, you step into the shade, right? At the edge of a jungle or a forest there, and immediately the temperature becomes more comfortable, right? After experimenting with, you realize every day, I get exhausted and I have to shut my eyes, and then I wake up and it's daytime again. Oh, okay, I'll call that sleep, right? So that's something that is required. I need rest. But at first you sleep on the ground and you discover very quickly that that's a bad idea because of the creepy crawly things, right? The snakes and the bugs and the biting insects and all that. Okay? And so you devise a hammock. But then the weather changes and you get rained on and you get snowed up because you're on a temperate island, right? You have all 4 seasons. And over time you discover if I can cover my skin, if I can stay out of the sun, I can take care of the problem that I have with the discomfort of my sunburn. And then as you get hungry, you start to, there's there's flora and fauna and flying birds and fish, right? And you start to notice, and you notice that this thing that you now call nature advertises. It advertises to you. You start to notice that those animals that have side-looking eyes, that eat vegetables, are not aggressive. But the animals that have forward-looking eyes and sharp incisors are biting, right? They're not the ones that eat, and those are the ones that eat the vegetables. So you start realizing, wait a minute, right? And when you get to the point where you've domesticated the seed of the animal, what do? You coax the more docile animals to hang around with you so that you don't have to chase them to get milk or to get meat or whatever. You get the command to fire at a certain point and you either accidentally or deliberately experiment and discover that meat is much better when it is cooked, right? I mean, think about cooking. Cooking as recipes, cooking as a human development to me is fractally miraculous. Like just thinking about who came up with, oh, what if we put this in it? You know what I mean? It's an amazing thing. But you on your island, slowly but surely, right? To get water, you realize, wait a minute, I could carry it in these gourds. I don't have to just go to the stream every day, right? And then you realize, wait, water operates in a strange way. It always travels downhill and it always finds the shortest route between A and B. So if I cut a trench, and I make a trench all the way from where the stream bends there to the beach, then I can have the water come to me. And now I've commanded fire, and I'm sleeping in a hammock, but then I do what? I build a hut out of hay. I experiment with sleeping in a cave. That's not comfortable at all, right? And then I say to myself, wait, I could make my own shelter. So I start with hay, I move to sticks, right? And ultimately, stone. And because I have these opposable thumbs, we have a unique combination of features as human beings that puts us at the top of the food chain. We have forward-looking eyes, big brains, opposable thumbs, right? Reasonably good senses. You know, my eyesight's not as good as an eagle, but it's reasonably good for survivability. But the biggest thing that we have that makes us so different on our island is these hips. Because these hips were made for walking. And apes' hips are splayed out. So while they can walk on 2 legs for short periods of time, they don't have anything to hold their guts in. Human hips, on the other hand, are bowls that hold and so our hips were made for walking, so uniquely among all of the animals, we can domesticate our island anywhere. And we do. Primates don't move very far from where they first started out because they're not built for it, okay? So on your island, you will, once you realize you can move water, once you realize that stone's better to build with than anything else, right, to shelter you from the weather, once you have command of fire and realize that you can move heat inside your house and actually heat water, you can use that for cooking. Now you've got indoor hot and cold running water, and you realize, wait a minute, if I make another branch for the water here and I devise a little throne for myself with a hole in it, I don't have to go use I don't have to go sit on a log to use the restroom and keep having to bury it because I can just have it flush right out into the... Can you imagine Rome at its height? Because what am I describing? I'm describing the Roman Empire. Rome at its height and all of those barbarian hordes to the north, and again, I'm telling you, it was the women. The women smacking their men on the arm saying, hot and cold indoor running water, you need to learn how to do that, right? And so those cultures fade out. I'm telling you, it's because of the women. Because men, they're too vain and proud to admit that their model of life isn't as good as that, right? But the women, they're like, you're not having any, you get nothing until I have indoor plumbing and heat, air conditioning, right? Seriously, right? So at the end of the day, let's say you've been on your island for millions of years. At the point at which you had gotten yourself materially situated so that you didn't have to work all the time, the water comes to you, the food comes to you, you're raising it, right? You would go through a period of time of what we would call monotony, right? Get up, gotta go slaughter the hogs, gotta feed the chickens, gotta make sure that the goats are doing okay and didn't escape my pen again and are eating me out of house and home, right? And you would lather, rinse, repeat, lather, rinse, repeat, and it would become tedious. Even though you've gotten to a level to where you don't have to do it all the time, right? And at that point, you would turn to a different kind of knowledge of your island. You would no longer need to worry about knowledge for its practical purposes. You would turn to a higher form of knowledge, which is knowledge for its own sake. And you would make a taxonomy of your entire island. You would decide that those things with feathers that are warm-blooded but lay eggs are called birds, right? And that and by the way, nature advertises in more ways than one. You've discovered on your island, for instance, that those bushes that have thorns and really, really brightly colored fruit are poisonous and taste very bad. And that the fish that you catch with your rod and reel in the ocean, when they're really, really pretty, it's like they're not done yet. But if you get an ugly one, boy, those are good eating, right? Right? And so you learn all of this, but once you've turned to the taxonomy of the island, your island, philosophy is born. You have secured yourself enough leisure to actually just know, not because you need it for survival, but because you want to, right? But given that the lifespan is 1 billion years, would you get to a point where on your island, you basically have exhausted everything that you can catalog? Probably so. And by the way, the guy in my scenario is the professor from the Gilligan's Island. He's smart enough to make a nuclear reactor with a coconut, but he can't repair the boat. So I'm not allowing my guy to figure out that he might need to. But at some point, he is going to circumnavigate. He is going to build that boat. He is going to go away, right? Away from the shore of the island and see if there are any more other islands out there, right? So, and that will occupy his time for a very, very long time. But if he stays confined to his island, even knowledge for the sake of knowledge is going to get exhausted at a certain point. And at that point, he's going to draw a face on a coconut and give it a name, right? And start talking to it. The other thing that he's going to notice after metaphysics and philosophical knowledge is born is he's going to start thinking about his own nature as well, right? We mentioned sleep, and he's going to think, one of the weird things that happens when I sleep is that sometimes I can fly. And I fly all over the island, and then I wake up, but I'm here. And so he's going to realize that his nature is different. It seems to have a component that is bodily, but it also has a component that he's going to end up calling mental or spiritual or some aspect that is not confined to the body. But then the more he thinks about it, he realizes that dreaming is not some fantastic thing. I always ask my students this, and it kind of makes their heads explode. Like when you leave here today, how are you going to get there? Where are you going?
Going home.
You're going home. How are you going to get there?
The car.
How are you going to get to your car?
You have to walk.
You have to walk. How are you going to walk and get to your car?
My legs.
With your legs. But here's the thing you have to do first. You literally have to project your future self to the car in advance of your present self and then meet yourself there. You have to travel in time. Human beings are time travelers. It's routine. You have to cast a future possible reality and then make it so. And if something happens, that reality is not going to be realized. Right? So now, next time you read Bartleby the Scrivener, this is what the dead letter is in Bartleby the Scrivener. Bartleby shows up, and the narrator of the story does not understand him. And it's like a dead letter. It's like a story that an artist wrote and sent out to a future reader who would understand it, and it never makes it. Right? So at what point, once you've exhausted your philosophic and your scientific knowledge, right, what would you turn to then? Art, music, play. And to put it shortly, what I say is, why is it that we want to cure cancer? It's because we want to play more football. It's because we want to go to the opera. It's because we want more time to do the things that make us happy, which is what we're fit for. That's what we were made for. The work, the job is in service to the happiness, right? So if you're lucky enough, you'll find a job that actually is what we call a career. Instead of an avocation, it's a vocation, and then you can do like I did, because I tell my students, I'm like, you're looking at a guy that doesn't have a job. It took me a long time to get there, but I finally figured out how to trick the state of Arkansas into paying me to do what I would do if I was a crazy homeless person living on the streets of Seattle, which is talk about this. Because it's the most important thing, right? Because that's what makes me happy. And so what I try to convince them now, think about this as the way that universities, they don't think of the arts and humanities as the reason that the other disciplines actually exist, but they are, because they're the highest things. And that is pure Aristotle. Anything that exists for its own sake is at the highest level of value that there can be in the universe. Anything that exists for the sake of something else is valuable, is good, but it is not the highest good, right? It's not the highest good. And you would figure this out on the island. And that's why I sort of played a game of leading the witness with my talk today and left the thought experiment for the end, because I was going to start with it. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of predetermine and say, look, the thought experiment is convincing because of all the other stuff, right? It's convincing because, wait a minute, that makes total sense. Like, that does seem to be what we're built for. That does seem to be. And when you look around you and you see happy people, you notice that they all have that in common. They know why they get up in the morning. They know why they do what they do. They're happy doing what they're doing. If they're like me, think of any number of non-millionaire farmers. That's what they love to do. Well, God bless you, man. You figured out the secret of life. Think about the Lord of the Rings. Have you all seen the Lord of the Rings? What's the last line? The last line is, well, I'm home. And the guy that played Gimli in the movie, in the commentary, and he's the smartest guy besides the one that played Saruman, he says, and that's what it's all about. And so you realize, oh, it ends that way because the entire reason to defeat all of the evil in the world is Rosie and Sam and their baby. That's the highest thing. They're the things that exist for their own sake, not for the sake of other things. Pure Tolkien. And I think that the actor that played Gimli is absolutely right. Because I read Tolkien when I was growing up, cut my teeth on him, and been thinking about him for a long time. But it seems to me like, oh, it's for the sake of that all of this other thing has to be defeated and has to be risked. Because that's the ideal. So I hope that what we can do is we can rethink the way we talk to students about why it is they need the humanities, no matter what their major is. And I'll just share with you a couple of anecdotal pieces of evidence that I've run across. About 25 years ago, somebody did a study of Nobel Prize winners in medicine. And the vast majority of them had liberal arts foundations, not just specializations in medicine. And somebody asked me one time, he said, how is it that a doctor that has read Shakespeare is better than a doctor that hasn't? And my answer was, because the doctor who's read Shakespeare understands you as a human being better than the one that's just trained to be a mechanic. Right? That's why we have these professional antagonisms between PhDs and MDs. I have a sister-in-law whose sister is an MD, and when I got my PhD, she's like, yeah, you PhDs, pile it higher and deeper. And so finally I just looked at her and I said, Cindy, I am well aware of the envy that MDs have for PhDs. So she said, I got you. And I learned about it because what's the difference between a PhD and an MD? For a PhD, we have to create something new. To get the degree, we have to create something that has never existed before. MDs, they don't. Now, I am not undercutting the importance of MDs, right? I'm not at all. But I think that we need to rethink the way that we talk about what the relationship is between, because as Terry knows, as you know, as I know, when I was working on my doctorate, I started to notice that English departments were starting to panic. And they had to make a utilitarian, practical argument for their own existence in relation to all of the other disciplines at the university. And I thought this is a sad turn, because what it means is that state legislatures and universities are beginning to think of college as a glorified jobs training program. And that is not. That should be a happy accident. Absolutely. But what we're not just churning out, because I'll tell you right now, Google and Elon Musk and all of the chatbot and all of that stuff, they've long since abandoned the idea that bright people need a college education to flourish in their environments. It's not a requirement. You go in, you interview, if you've got the chops, if you've learned how to code, if you've taught yourself, you're a gamer, they're good, right? That's what matters. And so I think it's been a mistake for the university and academia in general to try to justify its existence on the grounds that it is practically necessary for civilization. That's been a mistake, right? Because we should tout is that what we are producing are happy people, well-adjusted people, people who have the skills to be able to secure the life that's going to allow them happiness, because then the state of Arkansas benefits, because happy people don't run around stabbing other people in the eye with pencils, do they? Right?
Not usually.
So I'm not saying jettison the other things. I'm just saying understand what the real relationship is between them. That those practical things exist because what we're really made for the good life, is leisure. That's the goal. So thank you. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Sure.
I actually listened to a group research project a couple weeks ago, and they were looking at reading as therapy for people.
Mhm.
And they did like it was a really small scale research project, but
Right.
they were finding that people who, usually college students, if they just took a break and just read something like just something as simple as poetry,
Right.
their anxiety levels and their just nervous levels just plummet.
Well, think about it this way. Reading is the only activity that you can do where you can absolutely occupy somebody else's psychic space. You can't do it through film, you can't do it through drama, but reading, you're literally inside Emily Dickinson's head and in her brain and in her soul while you're reading those words. We call it the plural I, right, in lyric poetry. So I think what it does is it increases not only your empathy for other people, but also for yourself. So it surprises me not a jot that reading would be a great therapeutic tool, right? It's also a great memory enhancer, right? But again, what have we been doing for decades? We have been producing students that are mercenary readers. The only reading they do is the reading that they have to do. It becomes a chore and they don't like it. I was a principal of a private school for a while, and I had a mom say, well, did you create a what do you call it, literacy-rich environment, with lots of words all over the place, how they do in classrooms and all that stuff? And I said, look, I got a secret to tell you. You don't turn your kids into readers by surrounding them with words. You don't turn them into readers necessarily by reading to them. You turn your children into readers by your being a reader as a normal leisure activity. And then it's a thing. You see what I mean? Then it's a thing. It's not a foreign thing. It's something what's Dad doing? He's in the living room. He's got 3 books going all the time, right? Yeah, there's a lot of TV. There are a lot of smartphones I do all of it. But reading ended up being something that my kids were acclimated to as a normal leisure activity. And those students flourish because they're not frightened of it. If you read only as a mercenary, you're not exercising that portion of your brain. You're not making it your own. You see what I mean? So I always encourage my students in my classes, for instance, put down the tablets, put down your phone, stop taking pictures of note on the board, bring a legal pad and a pencil and write it down, because then you're making it your own. If you just take a picture of my notes on the board, that's me. And you're going to try to memorize them orally, and then you're going to have to recall them literally on the test, and they're going to be in the wrong part of your brain. Because your oral part of your brain flushes the toilet every time you fall asleep, right? You may have texted 1,000 times yesterday, and generally you have a basic memory of what you were talking about, but not word for word, right? Because it's not stored there. It's just that texting is oral. Even sending emails is old, vaguely. So yeah, I want to encourage us to really, I think secretly, we need to have a campaign to re-educate the state legislature about what the classical liberal arts can offer a great state like Arkansas, if everybody would have that core. Yes?
Well, when I was still teaching at Hillsdale, even there occasionally I would get a parent or a student, because we met with parents
Yeah.
there once a semester. Occasionally I would get someone to say, why do I have to take music appreciation?
Right.
And so I was able to give them a scenario, a very real scenario.
And by the way, Hillsdale, I forgot that you had been there. You know, University of Dallas and Hillsdale, they've been trading professors with each other. Like, they're very simpatico in their philosophical underpinnings. I admire Hillsdale a lot because it's not just about, we always talk about, well, we have to have the humanities because we want people to be well-rounded. But that's to make of the arts and of leisure and of sport and of the fun stuff sort of an added decoration to the necessary things. And I think that that's exactly the opposite. All the other things exist so that I can play disc golf.
One of the things I was able to tell this particular student and their parents, and I then told the class, was that a friend of mine that I met early on, she'd gone back to school, but also worked low level at IBM.
Mm-hmm.
And she called me one day and said, should I take music appreciation, theater appreciation, or art appreciation?
Right.
And I said, take music appreciation.
Right, of course.
Right. And she said, well, what if I don't like something? I said, you don't have to like everything, but know why you don't like it. And I said, maybe you'll discover something that you do like.
Another.
She
Go
loved
ahead. Yeah.
Verdi operas.
Yeah.
She was in a meeting at IBM because some big, I'm not going to remember his
Right.
name. He was coming to visit. He loved Verdi operas, so the company had bought him tickets to the Lyric because there was a big Verdi extravaganza going on. But the person who was supposed to take him who knew about Verdi couldn't go. So they asked in the company, okay, who knows?
Right. Yeah.
They went, he and his wife and her, they went out to dinner. She is now working with him
Right.
at the top of, I mean, so I told my class, I said, you never know, one, what you're going to discover that you like, and where that appreciation might take you.
Well, and here too, from a practical point of view, my roommate in grad school, Bob Kelly, working on his PhD when I was working on my master's, my wife and we did everything wrong. We got married while we were both working on our master's degrees. She got pregnant with our first child, then she got pregnant with our second child. I graduated with my master's first, even though I was behind at first. And then she was pregnant with Gracie this big when she graduated with her master's, and our professors were like, that never happens. You know, what happens in grad school is you meet somebody, you fall in love, life gets in the way, and you never finish. That's amazing. And then I waited a few years, I got the PhD. Bob got his PhD, he and Ann got married, they got pregnant, they're living out in the Seattle area. He calls me one day, he's like, I can't, he really wanted to work at a big tier 1 research university, right? Not a nibble, the market was really tough when we got out, right? I think there were 911 PhDs in literature and theory when I graduated, and there were only 306 tenure track jobs. I mean, it was dog-eat-dog. But I just went and got a job at a community college because I'm like, I got bills to pay and diapers to buy, so there are plenty of jobs. Y'all quit being so, ego-driven that you'll never work at a community. Go get a paycheck, that's a job, right? So he called me because he could not get an interview at a tier 1 university. He said, what am I going to do? I'm Dr. Bob Kelly, I'm working at a lumber yard. He was not happy, but he had bills to pay. I said, go to a temp agency. Well, he's in Seattle. Where do you think he landed? He landed at Microsoft. Then flash forward 20 years, he's Dr. Bob Kelly, Vice President of Marketing for Microsoft worldwide. Retires at 50, because I asked him, I said, are you ever going to come to academia? He said, look, as long as this keeps being what it is, because he loved it. So people would say, well, what can you do with an English major? I'm like, short of practicing medicine and law, anything you want. Seriously.
Well, actually,
My other
You
story,
can get a law degree with an English major.
no, English major is the #1 major sought by. So we've got to launch that. We got to let people know. If you're interested in law, don't go the social sciences route. You're going to pick that up. Or the criminal justice route. You're going to pick that up. You need to be an English major. My second story is about my friend Nick, who when he was an undergraduate at LSU when I was a graduate student, he was never my student, but I bartended at a place where he waited tables. I was married, I had kids. My wife would spit me out at the restaurant. I'd work until 11 o'clock and then I'd beg a ride home, right, from someone, whoever's close. And Nick and I didn't like each other at first. But then we discovered we had the same sense of humor. And you know, when you have the same sense of humor, you become fast friends, right? Because you see the world the same way. And one night I was like, Nick, would you mind giving me a ride home when you're finished with your stuff? And he's like, do you have to go home straight home? I said, no. He's like, well, let's go have a beer. Because I already knew my wife and kids were already asleep. It's, you know, between 11 and midnight. And so we went and had a beer, and then that became our habit. Nick would be like, do you need a ride home? You know, and we'd run across to Kroger's, we'd get a 6-pack of beer, and then here are these two guys talking about philosophy, art, literature, life, driving around the bayou. Well, right before he graduates from LSU, he comes to me and he says, hey, I took the LSAT, I'm going to law school. And I said, Nick, this is a really bad idea. Why are you going to law school? He said, well, here's my plan. Because he's a really talented writer and artist. He said, I'm going to go to law school, become a lawyer, make a bunch of money, and then I can be a novelist. And I was like, he's like, why, you don't think I could? I mean, I aced the LSAT. I said, no, of course you could. I said, but understand this, for every 1 millionaire lawyer there is out there, there are 1,000 ambulance chasers who are absolutely miserable. The law is not a job, it's a vocation, you know? People who are successful are the ones who love it. He said, what should I do? I said, go find an MFA program and pursue this huge talent that you have. So he went off to Austin and he bartended for a few years, and then he landed in the Fayetteville MFA program. He became a star. He got a short story published in The Atlantic, which is one of the last of the great sort of literary magazines on the planet. That got him an agent. He wrote his first novel. He got a job at DePaul University in Indiana when I was in Indiana too. There was an opening at DePaul. He called me. He's like, come down here. Wouldn't it be cool? He was writer in residence there, but he hated it. He's like, I hate it. They think I should be coming to committee meetings and answering email. I'm the writer in residence. All I want to do is teach undergraduate creative writing students about writing and write. And they won't let me do that, so I'm out. So he gravitated to Hollywood, and he got his agents out there, and then he said he went to a conference and with all these billionaires and stuff to give a talk on creative writing. And then he asked one of the people there, he's like, how do you make money doing this? You know what I mean? Because he sold 50,000 copies of his novel, maybe made, you know, 40, 50, not very much money. Books don't make you a lot of money. And they said, you got to write for television. So that's when he went out to Hollywood. He got an agent, and he said, how do I write for television? They said, do you write scripts? He's like, no. Well, you have to know how to write a script. 1 week later, he drops a script for the television show Justified. This is how it works, by the way. If you want to become a Hollywood writer, you pick the hottest property that's streaming right now, and you write an episode of that show as if you were writing for the show. And if you can convince them that you've got the chops to be able to do an episode of Game of Thrones, the next episode, then they're gonna give you a shot. They're gonna let you you have to do a concept, then you do a treatment, then you do a rough draft script, then you might be invited to do the final script, but a lot of people don't. There are a lot of writers in Hollywood that make their money just doing concepts, treatments, and rough draft scripts, and then they're out. And they make, like at the end of her career, Princess Leia, the actress Carrie Fisher, she was the go-to script doctor in Hollywood. She made all of her money. When there was a crisis on a set somewhere with a director and a writer, they'd be like, get Carrie Fisher on the phone, she can fix it. And she had a genius way of being able to do that. So long story short, Nick created True Detective. And Nick Pizzolatto, this is the guy I'm talking about. And you know, I didn't have HBO, so I didn't get to watch it for a long time. He's like, have you watched True Detective yet? And I'm like, Nick, I'm gonna get HBO, just, you know. Or why don't you just send me the DVD? He's like, just get HBO. So I finally saw a series, you know, the first season with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. And this is how Nick got it. He told his agents, he said, you need to get me in somewhere for this show. And they said, we made some calls, there's a producer that wants to, he said, no producers, they're bloodsuckers, they just make money off of my talent, you get me. So they got him, he had 2 agents, they got him a meeting at HBO. He didn't walk in with a concept, he didn't walk in with a treatment, he didn't walk in with a rough draft script or a sample, he walked in with season 1 completely written and already cast. Matthew McConaughey's this guy, Woody Harrelson's, he didn't know those 2 guys. And they greenlit him that day. So to this day, Woody Harrelson, Matthew McConaughey, Vince Vaughn, they're all executive producers on season 1, season 2, Vince, right? But they just kept going. By the way, season 4, Nick's name's on it, he's got nothing to do with it. Okay? Because I was like, oh, I can't wait till season 4 comes out. He's like, I had nothing to do with it, pretend my name's not on it, they've ruined it. And you know what, he was right. You know what I mean? But my point is, what I tried to help Nick do, you know what I mean, was get derailed by life, right? If this is what you're really serious about doing, I promise you. And my good friend, Tom Richard, he's an artist, right? And sometimes he'll complain. He'll be like, you know, if I just made that left turn toward New York City at that moment in my life, right, when I had the chance, things could have been different. Not that he's unhappy in his marriage or in his job and I looked around when he said that to me. I said, Tom, can I ask you a question? How old are you? And he said, told me. And I'm like, so let's say you made the left turn to New York and you became absolutely successful. What would you be doing right now? Would you be doing anything different than you're doing in this art studio right now? He's like, oh. I was like, you made it, man. You just didn't have to go through all the trouble. Do you see what I mean? Of going, and that's what I did. I was like, I saw the world according to Garp, and I was like, how the heck do you live like a millionaire without going through the trouble of actually making $1 million? I'll become a professor, right? Because I don't have to make a lot of money doing that, but I get to choose my schedule. I get my summers off if I want to. I get to wear the clothes I want to. And don't you go to the professional model, sir, because I will. If they tell me to wear a tie on this campus, you will see Dr. Borse show up in his car on the very first day wearing a clown suit with shoes this big. And I will get into a policy writing, policy interpreting war that they can't win.
Please do not email me.
No.
Wait till we're off the assembly.
Exactly. No. I mean, I'm joking, of course, but
No, but my dad had to put up with that.
yeah. I mean, it's just like no. I didn't. I traded the zeros on my paycheck to avoid that.
I did see him without a jacket on once.
Well, no, and I'm not saying look. And if I had to, you know what I mean? I can wear a suit, but
I texted his wife because I thought he might have been ill.
oh, okay.
But if you ever show up in a suit, we get pictures.
Yeah, I have a suit. I have a suit because there are funerals, there are weddings, there are, you know what I mean? Out of respect for other people, of course. But yeah, I remember a few years ago they were talking about that model, and I was like, look, my trade-off with you guys is that I do the stuff that I do inside my head for the benefit of my students 24/7. So how do I clock in for that? And do I get to make overtime? You know what I mean? Because I can start billing you if that's the way we want to do this job. But so long as you guys are allowed to underpay people, I'm willing. That's a good trade-off for me. Because you don't have to have a lot of money to be able to live well in a place like Monticello, Arkansas, right? You don't have to. And so I just decided, at a certain point. But my encouragement to us, the people that are doing the faculty stuff, is to start talking about it in these terms. One, we'll attract more majors, for sure. But two, we also might turn out students who are more happy, right? Because they're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I've got to go through the drudgery of this, but this is for the sake of that, right? So that kind of suffering is purgatorial. Because the thing about purgatorial suffering is that there's an end, right? Every day you go through that suffering, you're getting stronger and stronger and closer and closer and closer to the thing. This is the thing that gets you to the thing. but you're not stopping here. You're going to that, right? And I'm gonna have to call my friend Bob and tell him, hey, now that you've retired at 50 and you're a multi-millionaire, now you can go back to the academy and just do it for, be an adjunct. No committee meetings,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Just skate onto onto campus and do Shakespeare and do like I'm doing. So thank you guys for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.